How did dirt-cheap 1960s recipes become feasts that fed families with pride? Black mothers turned scraps into suppers that filled their homes with love and strength. What does it take to make struggle taste like celebration? Neck bone stew was the kind of meal that turned scarcity into comfort. Cheap cuts of pork neck, barely worth a few cents a pound, became a family feast when simmered low and slow. Black mothers in the 1960s knew that time, patience, and seasoning could make even the humblest ingredients taste like love. The pot would bubble for hours, filling the kitchen with the deep scent of onion, garlic, and pepper. Potatoes softened into the broth, thickening it until it clung to the spoon. The meat, once tough and overlooked, fell from the bone like silk. This was Sunday dinner on a shoestring, a dish that asked for little and gave everything. It brought families together after long weeks of work, a reward for endurance and care. Nothing about it was fancy, but every bite spoke of home and heart. A bowl of neck bone stew was proof that flavor lives in the hands, not the wallet. It reminded everyone that with love and skill, you could make plenty from almost nothing. Pinto beans and cornbread were more than a meal, they were a way of life. In the 1960s, they sat at the center of countless Southern tables, filling bellies and carrying pride through hard times. A pot of pinto beans simmered slow, seasoned with a scrap of pork or a spoon of bacon fat if you had it. The beans softened into something creamy and rich, full of smoky flavor that came from patience, not money. Beside it, the cornbread, crisp at the edges, tender inside, was baked in a cast-iron skillet, its golden crust sizzling as it came out of the oven. Families broke it apart by hand, soaking up every last drop of bean broth. It was food that sustained generations, food that didn't apologize for being simple. Black mothers made it with quiet pride, knowing that nourishment could be soulful even when funds were thin. It was thrift turned into comfort, and comfort turned into culture. Pig's feet in vinegar broth were a lesson in making do and making magic. Once considered scraps, pig's feet became a delicacy in kitchens that knew no waste. They were cleaned, boiled, and simmered with onions, garlic, pepper, and a splash of vinegar until the meat softened and the broth turned tangy and rich. The aroma filled small kitchens, cutting through the chill of winter nights. Served with white rice or plain cornbread, it was a dish that spoke of resilience and resourcefulness. Black families didn't have much, but they had know-how, and that turned bone and broth into something deeply satisfying. The vinegar gave the dish brightness, the gelatin made it silky, and together they created a flavor both humble and unforgettable. In the 1960s, meals like this weren't just about eating. They were about honoring every bit of what you had. Pig's feet in vinegar broth was proof that nothing given in love ever went to waste. Smothered cabbage and sausage was the art of stretching a single link of sausage to feed a whole family. A pot of cabbage might not sound like much, but when it hit a skillet with onions, garlic, and just one piece of sausage, it became a feast. The fat from that small bit of meat seasoned everything, coating the wilted greens with a smoky flavor that felt like more than it was. The sizzle of cabbage cooking was music in many 1960s kitchens, a reminder that flavor comes from creativity, not cost. Some added a splash of vinegar for bite, others a sprinkle of sugar to balance the salt. Whatever the method, the result was the same, a steaming plate that filled you up and comforted you through lean times. Smothered cabbage and sausage was a dish built on faith that love could multiply what little there was. Fried cornmeal mush turned yesterday's breakfast into today's dinner with nothing more than heat and ingenuity. It started as cornmeal porridge, cooked thick and poured into a pan to cool overnight. By the next day, it was firm enough to slice and fry in a skillet until golden brown at the edges and creamy inside. Black mothers made it for their children before school or served it with syrup for supper when money was tight. It cost almost nothing, just cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, but it tasted like plenty. The sizzling sound as the slices hit the pan was pure comfort, a sign that food was on the table and love was in the room. Fried cornmeal mush was the definition of resourcefulness. Nothing wasted, everything transformed. In homes where every dollar mattered, it wasn't just breakfast, it was pride reborn from leftovers. Black-eyed peas with fatback carried both luck and life in a single bowl. On New Year's Day, they symbolized hope. On any other day, they symbolized survival. A pot of black-eyed peas simmered with a piece of salted fatback made a meal that could feed a crowd. The peas softened into the smoky broth, each spoonful rich enough to need nothing else. It was hearty, comforting, and built entirely from pantry staples. Families passed down the recipe like a ritual: season, simmer, and serve with rice or cornbread. The dish carried a history older than the century itself, a taste of heritage that outlasted hardship. In the 1960s, it was as much about tradition as nutrition. Black mothers served it proudly, knowing they were feeding their families something sacred, a dish that honored the past and nourished the present. Chicken necks and rice was one of the most ingenious dinners of the 1960s kitchen. When meat was scarce, mothers turned the cheapest parts of the bird into something hearty and whole. The necks simmered in a pot with onion, pepper, and broth, their flavor seeping into the rice until it soaked up every drop. It was slow cooking at its best, simple, fragrant, and deeply filling. Children grew up loving it without realizing how little it cost. The bones gave flavor, the rice gave substance, and together they made a meal that felt generous. In the humblest homes, this was the taste of care, proof that love could turn scarcity into satisfaction. Every grain of rice held the story of effort and endurance, and every bite reminded families that making the most of what you have is its own kind of abundance. Sweet potato biscuits were the color of home and the taste of grace. Mashed sweet potatoes folded into biscuit dough made them golden, soft, and fragrant with warmth. They puffed up in the oven, filling the air with the scent of butter and spice. Served hot with syrup or fried apples, they turned even the plainest meal into celebration. In the 1960s, they were more than a treat. They were a statement of pride in tradition. Sweet potatoes came cheap and stored well, but in skilled hands, they became something extraordinary. Families served them at Christmas, Sunday dinner, or any day they needed to remember joy. Each biscuit was soft inside, crisp outside, and full of history, a legacy baked right into the dough. Sweet potato biscuits were the kind of food that fed the soul first, the stomach second. And when flour was scarce, a handful of mashed sweet potatoes could stretch it further, making sure no one went hungry. Children would sneak them off the counter while they were still warm, their fingers sticky with syrup and smiles wide as summer. They were comfort in edible form, a quiet reminder that sweetness could exist even in struggle. Every family had their own secret twist, a splash of molasses here, a sprinkle of nutmeg there, but the love behind it never changed. Canned salmon patties turned an inexpensive pantry item into dinner worth remembering. A tin of salmon, some breadcrumbs, onion, and egg. That was all it took. Black mothers in the 1960s knew how to make something from nothing, shaping each patty by hand and frying it golden brown in a bit of oil. The sizzle in the pan was its own kind of promise. Crisp on the outside and tender within, these patties were often served with rice, collard greens, or just a slice of bread and hot sauce. They were filling, flavorful, and affordable, exactly what a working family needed. Kids might have called them fish cakes, but they were really a symbol of thrift and triumph. Every bite carried pride, the kind that comes from doing more than expected with less than enough. Sometimes mothers would stretch one can to feed 6 mouths, mixing in more breadcrumbs or leftover potatoes to make it last. The patties fried up crisp and golden, perfuming the kitchen with a smell that brought everyone running to the table. They were served with a side of laughter and conversation, with stories swapped between bites. No one cared about where the fish came from. It was about how it was made, with care and patience that money could never buy. Canned salmon patties weren't just a meal. They were a reminder that love could always make a way. Mustard greens with cornmeal dumplings was a pot of love that stretched as far as $1 could go. The greens were cleaned, chopped, and simmered with smoked meat or fatback until tender. But it was the cornmeal dumplings, soft, savory, and lightly seasoned, that made it a feast. They floated on top of the pot, soaking up the flavor of the broth until they became part of it. The smell filled the house, comforting and familiar, like a memory you could taste. Mothers taught daughters to make it by feel, not by measurement, adding a little more cornmeal, a little more water, until it looked just right. This was cooking born from instinct and care, not recipes or rules. In every bowl was a lesson. Waste nothing, love everything, and make it stretch. Mustard greens with cornmeal dumplings was the taste of survival dressed up as Sunday dinner. The dumplings were soft but hearty, soaking up every drop of that smoky, peppery broth. The greens had a tang that cut through the richness, balancing the dish like music in harmony. When the pot hit the table, steam curling into the air, it felt like comfort itself had come home. Children might have grumbled at first about eating vegetables, but after one spoonful, they were silent, too busy savoring. This was a meal that could feed 8 for the cost of 1. Proof that soul food wasn't just about taste, but about triumph. Fried bologna sandwiches were the taste of everyday survival dressed in the comfort of simplicity. A slice of bologna, sizzling in a skillet until its edges curled up like petals, could make a kitchen smell like home. The meat browned and crisped just enough to turn salty and smoky, needing nothing more than a squirt of mustard and 2 slices of soft white bread. Sometimes there was cheese, sometimes a slice of tomato, but most times it was just bologna and love. In the 1960s, this sandwich was lunch for children and dinner for tired parents after long shifts. It was cheap, quick, and satisfying, everything a family needed when time and money ran short. The sound of that bologna frying meant comfort was coming, even if it came from a $5 grocery trip that had to stretch all week. Black mothers knew how to make a meal out of a memory, how to turn hunger into gratitude with a skillet and a steady hand. Some toasted the bread, others didn't bother. It didn't matter. What mattered was that every bite was warm, familiar, and full of care. Fried bologna sandwiches proved that joy could come from the simplest pan and the smallest paycheck. Okra and tomatoes was the dish that brought summer into the kitchen all year long. Fresh okra from the garden, sliced thin, met the tang of stewed tomatoes in a bubbling pot that smelled like sunshine and home. The colors alone, green and red glistening together, looked like love made visible. A little onion, salt, pepper, and a spoonful of bacon grease turned the humble vegetables into something rich and satisfying. In the 1960s, gardens fed families before grocery stores did, and nothing went to waste. Okra and tomatoes could be served over rice or eaten straight from the bowl, soaking up every bit of the savory juice with a piece of cornbread. It was Southern comfort in its purest form. No fuss, no fancy, just good food done right. Mothers taught their children to stir gently, to keep the okra from breaking down too much, passing down not just a recipe, but a rhythm of care. The dish was sweet, tart, and earthy all at once, a reminder that what came from the soil could sustain both body and spirit. Chitterlings, or chitlins, were not for the faint of heart, but for those who knew they were sacred. Cleaning them took hours, sometimes days, and the smell alone could send the unprepared running. But Black families understood their worth. Chitlins were what was left when the rest was taken, and turning them into a meal was an act of resilience. Boiled with onions, garlic, and a heavy hand of seasoning, they became tender and deeply flavored, their broth rich with soul and story. Served with hot sauce and a slice of cornbread, they were as close as food could come to heritage. In the 1960s, preparing chitlins was a family event. Women gathered in kitchens, talking, laughing, and cleaning together, transforming struggle into celebration. It was work, yes, but it was love too. Chitlins were a connection to history, a reminder of strength and survival passed down through generations who refused to waste anything. Rice and gravy suppers were the heart of thrift made delicious. A small piece of meat, a neck bone, a scrap of chicken, or a few drippings left in the pan was enough to make a meal when stretched with flour, water, and patience. The gravy simmered until it thickened into something rich and soulful, poured over rice that steamed like clouds. It smelled of comfort and resourcefulness, the kind of scent that made a house feel safe. In the 1960s, a pot of rice could feed a family for days, and gravy turned it into something that tasted like more than survival. Black mothers stirred that pot with intention, tasting as they went, seasoning not by measurement, but by memory. It was a ritual, a way of making something out of nearly nothing, again and again. When the table filled with bowls of rice and gravy, no one thought about what was missing. They only thought about how good it was to be together. Potato cakes from leftovers proved that yesterday's scraps could make today's joy. Mashed potatoes from the night before were mixed with flour, egg, and onion, then fried until crisp and golden. The edges crackled, the centers stayed soft, and the smell filled the house like a promise that nothing was ever wasted. Children would wait by the stove, hoping to grab one hot off the pan before dinner. Black mothers turned leftovers into something beautiful because they had to, and because they could. Every potato cake was an act of invention, proof that love and necessity were often the same thing. Sometimes they were served with applesauce, sometimes with hot sauce, sometimes just plain, eaten by hand. It was the taste of making do, but it never felt like settling. In those kitchens, thrift wasn't shameful. It was genius. Potato cakes were crispy proof that creativity was as nourishing as any ingredient. Crackling cornbread was what happened when resourcefulness met pure flavor. Leftover bits of pork rind, the crispy cracklins from rendering lard, were folded into cornmeal batter and baked until golden brown. The result was smoky, crunchy, and rich, a taste that turned a simple side into a star. Each bite carried a balance of salt, corn, and history. In the 1960s, nothing went to waste, not even the pieces others might have thrown away. Black mothers poured that batter into cast iron skillets, letting the edges brown just right before serving it hot from the oven. The smell alone could bring everyone running. Crackling cornbread paired perfectly with greens, beans, or stew, adding depth and satisfaction to every plate. It was more than a recipe. It was memory baked into every crumb. This was food that told a story, one of hard work, family, and the art of turning scraps into something worth savoring. Stewed okra with corn and bacon. Drippings was a dish born from whatever the pantry or the garden had to give. Okra and corn came together in a skillet slicked with bacon fat, simmering until the flavors blended into something soft, savory, and rich. The sweetness of the corn balanced the earthiness of the okra, while the drippings gave it a depth that money couldn't buy. It was a weekday meal, a pot stirred slowly while children played outside and supper drew near. In the 1960s, this kind of cooking was second nature, simple, practical, and deeply soulful. The ingredients were cheap, but the flavor was priceless. Served with cornbread or over rice, stewed okra and corn could make even the smallest meal feel abundant. It tasted like summer stored away for the cold months ahead, like proof that care could make plenty from anything. Collard greens with ham hocks was more than food. It was a ritual. The greens were washed leaf by leaf, chopped and simmered low with ham hocks until tender and fragrant. The broth, called Potlikker, was the real prize, rich with smoky flavor and nourishment. Families dipped their cornbread into it, savoring every drop. This dish filled homes with the smell of Sunday, even on an ordinary day. In the 1960s, collard greens meant more than just greens. They meant time, patience, and togetherness. Black mothers knew how to stretch one piece of meat into flavor for a whole pot, transforming thrift into abundance. Everyone in the house knew the sound of that pot simmering, the slow rhythm of love on the stove. By the time it hit the table, the greens were silky, the broth deep and soulful. It was history in a bowl, a taste that carried generations forward. Giblet gravy over rice turned every part of the chicken into something worth celebrating. Nothing was wasted, not the neck, not the heart, not the gizzard. Black mothers simmered the giblets slowly, chopping them fine and stirring them into gravy rich with flour and pan drippings. Poured over rice, it became a feast born of frugality. The flavor was deep and savory, with every bite telling the story of ingenuity and care. In the 1960s, throwing anything away was unthinkable, so this dish became a quiet triumph of skill. Children might not have known what they were eating, but they knew it tasted good. The gravy clung to every grain, warm and familiar, a reminder that abundance is often made, not bought. Giblet gravy over rice was more than a meal. It was respect for the work it took to make something from everything. Homemade syrup and biscuits was breakfast and dessert rolled into one. When store-bought sweets were out of reach, mothers made their own syrup with nothing but sugar, water, and love. Boiled until thick and amber-colored, it poured slow and warm over fresh biscuits pulled from the oven. The biscuits were tender and golden, their smell filling the kitchen long before sunrise. In the 1960s, mornings started early and money was tight, but this simple pairing made every day feel a little sweeter. Children waited eagerly for the syrup to cool just enough to touch, licking it off their fingers between bites. It was sweetness made by hand, proof that care could taste better than anything sold in a store. Homemade syrup and biscuits weren't just food, they were affection poured into a pot and baked into bread. It was love, boiled down and baked up one morning at a time. Fried green tomatoes were the taste of summer ingenuity, bright, tangy, and full of life. Picked before ripening, firm green tomatoes were sliced thin, dipped in cornmeal, and fried until crisp and golden. The oil hissed and popped, filling the kitchen with a scent that pulled everyone close. Black mothers knew that nothing from the garden should go to waste, and these unripe tomatoes proved it. The crust crunched between your teeth, giving way to a tart bite that danced with salt and spice. They were eaten hot off the skillet, stacked between slices of bread, or sprinkled with a touch of sugar for contrast. In the 1960s, gardens were a lifeline, and creativity turned their yields into miracles. These tomatoes didn't need luxury. They were luxury. They were resilience in edible form, a reminder that even what isn't ready can still be perfect. The meal cost next to nothing, yet tasted like everything worth keeping. Bread pudding with raisins was dessert born from nothing but love and yesterday's leftovers. Stale bread, instead of being thrown away, was soaked in a mixture of milk, eggs, sugar, and cinnamon until soft and golden. A handful of raisins turned it sweet and celebratory, transforming a humble base into something grand. Baked slowly, it puffed up and filled the house with warmth, the kind that made even the poorest meal feel rich. Black mothers poured patience into every pan, teaching their children that food was sacred when made with intention. The pudding was soft in the middle, crusted at the edges, and often served with a drizzle of homemade syrup or cream when the budget allowed. In the 1960s, this was what comfort looked like: warm, simple, and made with care. Every bite carried the memory of hands that refused to waste and hearts that refused to quit. Bread pudding wasn't just dessert. It was gratitude you could taste. Cabbage and hot dog skillet was the working family's one-pan wonder. Cabbage, sliced thin and sautéed in a bit of oil or bacon grease, met the smoky flavor of a single hot dog sliced into coins. It didn't look like much, but the smell was pure comfort. Savory, rich, and full of life. The cabbage softened and caramelized, soaking up every hint of flavor the meat could offer. Sometimes a chopped onion or splash of vinegar joined the mix, turning it into a full meal for pennies. Black mothers made this on long weekdays when time and money were both stretched thin. Kids loved the salty bites of hot dogs scattered through the cabbage, like small surprises hidden in every forkful. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. In homes where food had to go far, this skillet meant satisfaction without struggle. It was a small act of love disguised as supper. Rice pudding with evaporated milk was a dessert that stretched one can and one cup into something soft and sweet enough for everyone. Leftover rice met evaporated milk, sugar, butter, and a pinch of cinnamon, simmered slow until thick and creamy. The scent filled the air, warm, milky, and comforting like a hug at the end of a hard day. Black mothers knew how to make this pudding last, adding raisins or nutmeg when they could, or just serving it plain and perfect. It was dessert, breakfast, or comfort food, depending on what the day needed. The texture was silky, the flavor nostalgic, a memory of kitchens where nothing went to waste and every spoonful mattered. In the 1960s, a single can of milk was treasure, and this recipe made it shine. It reminded families that care, not cost, made food special. Each bowl was sweet proof that love could make plenty from little. Butter beans with salt pork were a taste of patience and simplicity. The beans, pale and tender, simmered low and slow with just a few pieces of salt pork until the broth turned rich and velvety. Each spoonful was mild, buttery, and deeply satisfying. In the 1960s, this was dinner for those who worked long days and came home hungry for comfort. A pot of butter beans could feed a crowd, and the salt pork's flavor stretched through every bite. It was humble food, yet it felt indulgent in its warmth and fullness. Families gathered around, bowls steaming, with cornbread on the side to soak up the liquid gold at the bottom. Black mothers turned simplicity into mastery, showing that soul food wasn't about extravagance, it was about heart. Butter beans with salt pork reminded everyone that slow-cooked meals had a way of feeding more than just the stomach. They fed the soul. The aroma alone could make neighbors stop by to chat at the screen door, drawn in by the promise of something good. The beans shimmered under the light, thick with flavor, soft as comfort itself. Children learned early to savor that first spoonful, to feel the calm that came with each bite. It was a meal that didn't just fill. It soothed, teaching everyone at the table that love and time were the best seasonings there ever were. Fried chicken gizzards were proof that skill beat luxury every time. Tough and overlooked, gizzards needed patience. A long soak, a slow boil, then a dip in seasoned flour before hitting the hot oil. But once fried, they turned crisp, flavorful, and irresistible. The outside snapped under your teeth, giving way to tender, meaty perfection inside. Served with hot sauce or just salt and bread, they were a delicacy for those who knew how to make something out of scraps. In the 1960s, nothing was wasted, and this dish turned necessity into pride. The sound of them sizzling in the pan was a song of survival, of families who made feast from what others threw away. Gizzards were a reminder that good food wasn't about cost, it was about care. They were the reward for work, patience, and heart, served hot and golden from a kitchen filled with love. The smell alone could bring everyone running, a promise of crunch and spice waiting in every bite. Mothers seasoned the flour by instinct, no recipe written, just memory and magic guiding every handful. The first bite always brought silence, the kind born from pure satisfaction. In that quiet, families tasted both history and hope, proof that struggle could still make something beautiful. Molasses cake was a dessert that tasted like home, dark, sweet, and full of history. Made with pantry staples like flour, sugar, and molasses, it was the kind of treat that made you feel rich even when you weren't. The batter was spiced with cinnamon, ginger, and clove, then baked until the scent wrapped around the whole house. Its crumb was dense but tender, sticky at the edges where the molasses caramelized just right. Black mothers made it for holidays or special Sundays when a little sweetness felt like a blessing. Served plain with a bit of whipped cream or a drizzle of syrup, it was always perfect. In the 1960s, a bottle of molasses was worth more than gold. It meant flavor that lasted. This cake didn't need frosting or fuss. It was enough as it was, a reminder that sweetness could come from the simplest shelf in the pantry. The deep brown color glowed under the light, its smell rich and warm as a memory. Each slice carried the taste of patience, the kind that only comes from slow stirring and slow living. It was the dessert that lingered on the tongue and in the heart, a quiet celebration of everything earned the hard way. Cabbage soup with potatoes and onions was a meal built from almost nothing but care. The ingredients were few: a head of cabbage, a couple of potatoes, an onion, and some seasoning. But together they became something nourishing and good. The soup simmered slow, the vegetables breaking down into a broth both savory and sweet. The scent of it filled the kitchen, soft and steady, like comfort made visible. In homes across the South, this was what you made when the pantry looked empty, but hope was still alive. Black mothers ladled it out with love, their hands knowing exactly when it was done. Not by the clock, but by the heart. A slice of cornbread on the side turned it into a full meal. It was proof that you didn't need meat or money to make something that tasted like home. Cabbage soup was both survival and serenity in a bowl. The steam fogged up kitchen windows while laughter floated from the next room. Children would dip their bread into the hot broth, soaking up every bit of warmth, while the elders sat quietly, savoring the peace of a full stomach. It was the kind of food that didn't just feed, it healed, gently and completely, in a world that often forgot to be kind. Corn fritters were little bites of sunshine, sweet or savory depending on what the day demanded. Fresh corn was scraped from the cob, mixed with flour, milk, and egg, then fried by the spoonful in hot oil. The edges crisped, the centers stayed soft, and the smell was enough to make mouths water from room to room. Served with syrup for breakfast or salt for supper, they brought joy to every table. In the 1960s, nothing got wasted, not even leftover corn, and fritters made sure of that. They were small, quick, and filling, perfect for hungry children and tired parents alike. Black mothers flipped them with practiced ease, knowing by sound when the oil was ready and by smell when they were done. They tasted of cornfields, summer heat, and ingenuity. Corn fritters turned simplicity into celebration, a skillet full of proof that love always multiplies when shared. The golden edges crackled as they cooled, and little hands reached eagerly for the first bite. Some families sprinkled powdered sugar on top, others drizzled honey, turning a humble recipe into dessert. The sound of frying oil and laughter was the soundtrack of many Southern kitchens, proof that even in lean times, joy could be made, one spoonful at a time. Hog maw with collards and rice was the truest kind of soul food, a transformation of scraps into sustenance, struggle into strength. Hog maw, or the stomach lining of the pig, was cleaned, seasoned, and simmered for hours with collard greens until tender and full of flavor. The broth it made was rich and smoky, soaking into the rice served beneath. It wasn't fancy, but it was powerful, a dish built on memory, faith, and hard work. In the 1960s, meals like this defined what it meant to make do and make it beautiful. Preparing hog maw was labor, but it was also love. Families gathered around the table, each bite carrying the weight of heritage and the warmth of perseverance. It was food that told a story, of ancestors who made a way out of no way, of mothers who fed their families with courage and grace. Hog maw with collards and rice was history, served hot. The smell lingered in the house long after dinner was done, smoke, spice, and soul mingling together like memory itself. Each spoonful carried the spirit of generations that refused to be broken. It was more than nourishment. It was testimony, proof that what the world discarded could still become something sacred. Pine needle tea offered a bright and restorative drink when fresh produce was scarce during cold months. Enslaved foragers collected the youngest green needles from longleaf and loblolly pines, rinsed them carefully, and steeped them in hot water until the brew released a light citrus aroma. Rich in vitamin C, this tea helped ward off scurvy and brought a welcome freshness to winter diets heavy with salt-preserved foods. The practice echoed both indigenous traditions and West African herbal knowledge, merging two continents' wisdom into a single sustaining cup. Families continued to brew pine needle tea well after emancipation, and it remains popular among modern herbalists for its gentle flavor and reputed immune-boosting qualities. Its evergreen scent and warm golden color remind us that even in the most barren season, the forest offered nourishment. Pine needle tea illustrates how observing the land and respecting its cycles allowed people to find both medicine and comfort, turning what others overlooked into a sustaining daily ritual that strengthened body and spirit alike. Homemade crackling bread filled kitchens with the savory perfume of pork fat and toasted cornmeal. Families saved every scrap of rendered pork skin, frying it until crisp and then folding the cracklings into cornbread batter rich with buttermilk and a touch of lard. Baked in a well-seasoned skillet, the bread emerged with a crisp crust and pockets of salty crunch that delighted children and elders alike. It was a dish born of necessity, ensuring nothing from the hog went to waste, but it also became a treat that people looked forward to at Sunday dinners. Neighbors often traded cracklings after a hog killing, turning the preparation into a social event that celebrated thrift and flavor. Today, store-bought cornbread mixes rarely capture the depth or texture of the old-style cracklin' bread, and few families still render their own pork. For those who have tasted it, the memory of that smoky, savory slice remains a reminder of community resourcefulness and the joy of making something extraordinary from humble ingredients. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillies, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Okra and tomatoes stew was the kind of dish that stretched a garden into a meal. The pot came alive with color, bright reds and deep greens bubbling together, thickened just enough to cling to rice or cornbread. Okra was the backbone, its silky texture giving body to every spoonful, while tomatoes brought the tang that tied everything together. Grandparents made it in the summer when gardens overflowed and nothing went to waste. If you had a little onion, a pinch of salt, and patience, you could feed everyone. The smell drifted through the house, a mix of earthiness and spice that promised something hearty on the table. It wasn't just about taste, it was about gratitude, about pulling something beautiful out of the soil and turning it into sustenance. In lean times, this stew could hold a family steady. Some added smoked sausage when they had it, others kept it purely from the garden. But the feeling it gave was always the same: full, content, cared for. It's a dish that proves comfort doesn't need money, just memory. Wild rice pudding combined indigenous grains with African-inspired preparation to create a dish both nourishing and subtly sweet. Wild rice grew naturally in shallow lakes and slow rivers, and enslaved families near these wetlands harvested the dark grains with paddles and baskets, drying them in the sun for year-round use. Cooked slowly in water until tender, the rice was stirred with a bit of sorghum syrup or honey if available, making a warm pudding that supplied protein and lasting energy. Its nutty flavor and satisfying texture turned a simple bowl into a special treat, especially when fresh fruit or spices could be added. This recipe carried forward after emancipation as African-American cooks continued to value wild rice for festive meals and family gatherings. Modern chefs still celebrate its earthy richness, but the story behind wild rice pudding honors the blend of native and African foodways that sustained people through scarcity and created a dessert that is at once humble and deeply rooted in the shared history of America's wetlands and kitchens. Sweet potato pie with brown sugar meringue crowned holiday tables with a beauty that matched its flavor. Smooth, mashed sweet potatoes blended with warm spices created a filling as rich as any custard, poured into a flaky handmade crust. The crowning touch was a cloud of meringue whipped with brown sugar until caramel-scented peaks formed and browned lightly in the oven. Families saved the first slice for honored guests or elders, a sign of respect and affection. The pie carried the sweetness of the southern soil and the skill of generations who knew how to stretch simple ingredients into celebration. Children licked the mixing bowls clean while parents watched the meringue rise, a shared moment of anticipation before the feast. Over time, commercial pies and instant mixes dulled the tradition, but those who remember the warm aroma of brown sugar meringue know that this dessert is more than food. It is a memory of family love, patient hands, and the quiet pride of homemade beauty. Sweet corn and onion skillet was the kind of dish that came together quickly, made from what the garden and pantry had to offer. Fresh ears of corn, or sometimes canned when the season had passed, were sliced from the cob and tossed into a hot pan with sliced onions. Lard or bacon fat did the work of bringing flavor, sizzling until the onions browned and the corn caramelized. The smell was sweet and smoky, filling the house with a promise of comfort even before the first bite. It was cheap, it was fast, and it was nourishing, the kind of supper that stretched across countless families trying to make ends meet. My grandmother served it with bread or cornbread, letting the skillet's juices soak into every bite. The simplicity was its strength, just vegetables and fat, transformed into something more than the sum of its parts. Sweet corn and onion skillet reminded everyone that even with little, you could still eat well. Candied yams with brown sugar and butter were the sunshine of the dinner table. They glistened under the oven light, sweet enough to make children hover close and adults sneak a second spoonful. The yams were sliced thick, bathed in melted butter, brown sugar, and a touch of cinnamon, then baked until the edges caramelized and the syrup turned glossy. It was dessert disguised as a side dish, a holiday tradition that showed up even when times were lean. Sweet potatoes were easy to grow, affordable, and rich in comfort, making them a Southern staple long before store-bought sweets came along. Families treated them like a celebration of resourcefulness, how something grown in the ground could taste like grace itself. On Christmas morning or after church on Sunday, that first bite always tasted like home. No matter who made them, the smell was unmistakable, warm, rich, and heavy with memory. For grandparents, this dish was proof that sweetness could still be found in hard times, and for everyone who came after, it became a symbol of continuity. The taste lingered long after the plates were cleared, a quiet reminder that joy, like brown sugar, can rise out of the simplest things. Ground pumpkin seed. Porridge transformed leftover seeds into a hearty meal that supplied both protein and healthy oils. After pumpkins were cooked for pies or stews, the seeds were washed, dried, and pounded into a coarse meal. This meal was simmered slowly in water or thin milk, creating a creamy porridge with a subtle nutty flavor. Sweetened lightly with honey or molasses when available, it became a sustaining breakfast or evening dish that used every part of the harvest. The method reflected West African culinary traditions where ground seeds thickened soups and stews, showing how transplanted knowledge enriched American foodways. Generations after emancipation, pumpkin seed porridge remained a seasonal specialty in some rural areas, appreciated for its nourishing qualities and gentle taste. Modern cooks might recognize it in contemporary seed-based milks and cereals, proving that this centuries-old practice still influences how we eat today. Ground pumpkin seed. Porridge highlights the wisdom of never wasting what nature provides and celebrates a heritage of careful resourcefulness that continues to inspire. Okra and tomato succotash brought color and heritage together in one bubbling skillet. Fresh okra pods, sliced thin, mingled with sweet ripe tomatoes, corn kernels, onions, and peppers, creating a medley that linked West African traditions with Native American harvests. The dish simmered until the vegetables melded into a savory stew, thickened naturally by the okra's silken texture. Farmers' markets once overflowed with the ingredients every late summer, and families counted on succotash to stretch their crops and fill their tables. It was a side dish that could stand as a main course when meat was scarce, and its bright flavors paired beautifully with cornbread or rice. Elders told stories of ancestors who carried seeds and memories across oceans and frontiers, weaving history into every spoonful. Though many still grow okra and corn, the slow, careful preparation of true succotash has become rare, replaced by frozen blends and quick sautés that cannot match the patient flavor of the old garden skillet. Stewed chicken backs were one of those meals that turned scraps into sustenance. In the 1960s, the back of the chicken was considered the cheapest cut, with little meat clinging to the bones. My grandmother bought them in bulk, cleaned them, and simmered them for hours with onions, potatoes, and carrots until the broth grew rich and fragrant. The long cooking softened the bits of meat so they slid easily from the bones, creating a meal that was both filling and flavorful. Families served the stew over rice or with cornbread, stretching the broth even further. The dish carried smoky undertones if she added a ham bone or a splash of fatback, but it was nourishing even without extras. What made it memorable was how something so overlooked could still feel satisfying and dignified at the table. Stewed chicken backs reminded families that nothing should be wasted, and even the smallest scraps could anchor a full dinner. It was a meal of patience, thrift, and creativity, proof that the cheapest part of the bird could still feed a household with warmth and pride. If these forgotten feasts remind you of home, tell us which dish still warms your heart. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more stories like this keep cooking.